Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. It is Wednesday, the 1st of February, 2012, and our special guest is Cable Green. Cable, welcome. For it. The Future of Education is sponsored by my Web 2.0 Labs project. It's finding places to allow educators to communicate. We won't go through all the details of the ISTE events this year, but just remember there's a ton of fun that happens. It's all community organized and based. Go to isteunplugged.com. We've rebranded EduBloggerCon, which is now in its 5th year. It's going to be called Social EdCon, the all-day unconference that starts us off. Lots more fun, that whole conference at ISTE. In fact, not up on the screen, but just announced today is we're going to do the same thing at CUE, the Computer Using Educators Conference in California. So for that, go to QUnplugged.com. It is also the 5th anniversary of Classroom 2.0, two really fun projects just to make you aware of. One is called Ed Incubator, helping small startups get an authentic educator council. So our first group is PBS NewsHour. They're kind of breaking the ground for us. We're trying to learn and make sure that we do this well. We have a little bit of a waiting list of other groups that want to come in and get good advice from educators. We'll see how it goes. Please join us. Go up to Ed Incubator on the menu at classroom20.com. Click on PBS NewsHour and join us for some fun. Also, we've announced a crowdsourced book program, sort of a treasury of best practices of using the web in the classroom, and that's the book link at the top. We've just announced that. We are going to publish every submission on the web. We'll select some number of those to go in the actual physical book, but we're trying to create an ecosystem here for you to get noticed for the work that you're doing. Coming up on our worldwide and free virtual conferences, we are going to announce a Classroom 2.0 5th anniversary celebration, but we don't have a date for that. Gaming and Education on April 26th, thanks to BrainPop, 12 hours worldwide talking about gaming in ed. The Alternate Education Conference, Homeschooling, Unschooling, Virtual Schooling, May 10th to 12th. The Library 2.0 Future of Library 2.012 Future of Libraries Conference, sponsored again this year by San Jose State University, October 3 to 5, and the Global Education Conference, the Mothership, November 12 to 16th. Again, these are all free, lots of fun. Hope you'll join us for them. Coming up on the Future of Education tomorrow night, a terrific panel on personal learning profiles. Hope you'll join us for that. Lorette Lynn next week, the Unplugged Mom. Alan Blankstein on improving individual schools. Khalid Smith on Startup Weekend EDU. Jane Hart on social learning. You're lots there. David Weinberger, Mimi Ito, Kathy Davidson, Howard Rheingold, Jennifer Fox, and new as of today, Julie Lindsay and Vicki Davis to talk about their new book, Flattening Classrooms. If you've missed one of the shows, they are all recorded and up in full Collaborate recordings and MP3 recordings as well. David Lurcher last night talked to us about the library as learning commons and personal learning environments. If you haven't listened to David, this is a really interesting bridge between the library 2.0 world and the ed tech world. But a delightful conversation with him. We're going to have him on again. That was his second time, but I promise he'll come back. Lee Crockett talked about 21st century fluencies. Henry Eyring talked about the innovative university. Cheryl Nussbaum Beach, the connected educator. Mitch Pearlstein talked about the fragmentation of the family. That one was fascinating as well. Anyway, they're all good, so hopefully there's something there that's of interest to you. So we have a smaller group tonight, but we're going to give you a chance to let us know where you're listening from. Look to the left of the map for some icons. You're looking for the star or the sun icon. Double-click on that, click on the map. It's also fun if you shout out in the chat and let us know what your location is, the time, the temperature, etc., etc. So Cable's in Denver on vacation, which is kind of you to come for this. Wherever you're listening from, and if you're listening to the recording, thanks so much for joining us. This is sort of an encore performance with the addition of questions, because Cable did present as a keynote recently, and so we're delighted. In fact, this is a talk I'm guessing you give quite often, Cable. Is that correct?
Actually, when you saw it at the Open Ed conference, that was the first time I'd ever done it. I was pretty nervous.
Oh, you did a great job. And then you did it for us, I think, for the Global Education Conference, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. We did a version of it, and I did it at the Sloan conference as well, and a few more coming up. They're all different, but they have a similar theme.
Well, I've noticed that you have some new slides, so I'm looking forward to you going through this. Feel free to go through at whatever speed is comfortable for you. You know, I do have some questions for you, so I'm hoping that we'll get to a place where we can actually kind of drill down a little. But this is your story, and it's a good one, so I'm going to let you. You're going to give me indicators to move the slides forward, but I'm going to let you go. And if those of you in the audience, you're going to hear him say "sly," and that's me. That's my job, is to move the slides forward.
Great. Well, thanks very much, and thanks again for the invitation, and I hope that we have a great conversation tonight. So the title of this thing, and I'll move the first couple slides, Steve, it's called The Obviousness of Open Policy, and I call it that because I really believe that's the case, and I hope that by the end of our discussion today, you too will think that open policy is obvious to help us get to where we need to be. So this first slide, and I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my notes here. So one of the examples I use to make the point is I talk about a food machine, and I say, look, if you look at the World Food Program, there are about 925 million undernourished people in the world today. It means there's a whole bunch of people not getting food. And what if we had a food machine that we could turn on, feed everybody? Marginal cost of doing it was close to zero. Didn't hurt anybody, didn't hurt any farmers. The net result is everybody's got enough food to eat. The question for all of us is, should we turn on the machine? So let's take a vote, and let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Click on the green check if you think we should feed everybody, and a red X if you think we should not. Again, remember, the marginal cost of feeding everybody on the planet is zero. So we'll come back to this in a minute. While we don't have a food machine, I believe that we have a learning machine. And so I start with my education dream, and in fact, many others' dreams, and that is that everybody in the world can attain the education that they desire. So I'm going to go ahead and switch here, and then I'll go to the next slide. And good news that this isn't just a dream, but not just my dream, but many have this dream. In 2006, Kathy Casserly, my current boss at Creative Commons, and Mike Smith were both at the Hewlett Foundation, and they wrote, and I quote, "At the heart of the movement toward open education resources is the simple and powerful idea that the world's knowledge is a public good, and that technology in general, and the World Wide Web in particular, provide an opportunity for everyone to share, use, and reuse it," end quote. Well, let's go to the next slide. It should be the Cape Town Declaration. If you haven't seen the Cape Town Declaration, please take a look at it. It's probably the best document that I've seen that really lays out what the possibilities are today around education when you use the internet, when things are digital, when you use open licensing, and when your intent is to share. So the first sentence in the Cape Town Declaration is, and I quote, "We are on the cusp of a global revolution in teaching and learning. Educators worldwide are developing a vast pool of educational resources on the internet, open and free for all to use. These educators are creating a world where each and every person on earth can access and contribute to the sum of all human knowledge." Slide. So that's all great, and the vision's good, but the policy issue, and this is where I'm particularly interested, policymakers can't do anything with that information. The vision or any policy they might enact if they don't understand what's possible. And in fact, most policymakers don't understand the technology and the legal tools that many of us understand. And if they don't understand those tools, they simply don't have the tools they need to, quote unquote, turn on this learning machine. So to be clear, understanding the opportunity afforded by wielding these tools, by these tools I mean the internet, things being digital, open Creative Commons licensing, and people's willingness to share on the web. If you don't understand those things, you can't even comprehend what's possible with OER. And so, to summarize, without this understanding, policymakers can only make decisions within existing frameworks and within existing business models. So what's our job? Slide, let's go to the cost to copy slide. Our job really is to educate them on what's possible. So a couple quick slides. These are from David Wiley, stats that he took off Amazon's AWS services, where of course you can host stuff for almost free. So David likes to say that if you look at the cost of a textbook, take a 250-page, pretty common length for a textbook. If you want to copy that thing by hand, it costs $1,000. You do print on demand, it's under $5. You copy a digital version of it, and you can see it's 0.00084 cents. Let's go to the next slide, the copy or cost to distribute. And so you've got copy costs and you've got distribution costs. And distribution costs, again, you want to mail the thing, it's roughly $5. You want to send it over the internet, you can see it's 0.00072. So next slide. What's the point? Well, the point is that copy and distribution are free when you've got something that's digital. And when things are digital, it in fact changes everything. So let me just come back here, and I'll go ahead and move my slides for a minute. So let me just tell you a little bit about Creative Commons, because Creative Commons and open licensing, where I work, is really core to a frictionless sharing of digital content on the web is really what it's about. So Creative Commons is a simple, standardized way to grant copyright permissions to other people without giving up your copyright. And this is very important. Many people think that if you're going to share something that's digital, you have to put it in the public domain, or if I give it to you, in fact, I give it to you and now I don't have it anymore. And that's not the case. The good news is that you can, in fact, put an open license and have some rights reserved, and you keep your copyright, and you get to determine what's done with your works and under what conditions. So when you go to the Creative Commons page, just creativecommons.org, we've got a license choose. You just click on Get a License right in the middle of the page, and you simply choose the conditions. And so all of our licenses require attribution. Share alike simply means if somebody changes your stuff, they have to relicense the derivative work or the new thing that they built under the same license that you selected. Non-commercial is pretty clear. It means you can't make commercial use of it, and then no derivatives, of course, means you can't make modifications to my work. You choose those things and you mix and mash, and you get one of these 6 licenses. You've probably seen these all over the web. And then, of course, these licenses exist on this continuum from what I call least free to most free, or kind of fewest degrees of freedom down here at the bottom to most degrees of freedom up at the top. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Complexity comes with many choices, and that's why if you look at, say, the free and cultural works definition, and those folks, they will really kind of guide you toward the top 3 licenses here. And in fact, when I'm working with folks around open educational resources, if at all possible, we really try to stay up toward the top of this continuum because, again, it's around degrees of freedom. So if your intent is to share, you want to give as much flexibility as you can to users who are downstream and might make derivative works. When I was in Washington State, and I see some folks from Washington State on today, thanks for joining. We built, and they are still building, an open course library, the whole gen ed curriculum for community colleges, and they chose the CC BY license up here. Good news about CC licenses is that they're not just the legal code, but in fact there's 3 layers to every license, and this makes them significantly more powerful than any other legal documents that are out there around sharing. First of all is the legal code, which you would expect for lawyers to read if you ever get sued and have to go to court or you need to sue somebody else. You've got the legal code to do it. CC licenses have been upheld every time they've gone to court. They're solid legal licenses. The human readable deed you've all seen and are familiar with, and the machine readable is critical because, of course, then computers on the internet, search engines can actually not only see the license but can decipher the metadata that's in them. And let me go ahead and pause here because I see Steve has his hand up. Go ahead, Steve.
So, Cable, you're obviously employed by Creative Commons. What's Creative Commons' source of revenue?
Yeah, it's a great question because all the licenses are free. There are over 500 million of them being used on the web, and we didn't charge anybody anything for the licenses. So who pays for Creative Commons operating costs? One is just the users of Creative Commons who just give a little bit of money in our annual campaign, just like people give to Wikipedia when they ask for money because they're happy that Wikipedia exists. So there are many folks, yeah, sort of like PBS, right? What you're driving in your car and the PBS says, please send us money, we rely on you. We do some of that too. And a big chunk of our revenue, in fact, comes from that. Also foundations that are happy that we exist because they like to see knowledge shared in a more frictionless environment. Foundations give us money, and we get, sometimes we'll get contracts to do certain projects. So for example, right now, Creative Commons is working to support, along with our partners, the Department of Labor TACT grantees. So all the community colleges that got $500 million to build new programs, we're actually providing support, and we received a big grant to provide that support. So a whole mix of different fund sources, but that's where we get our money from. Okay, I'll watch or listen for Steve's hand to go up again, but I see he put it down, so I'll jump back into it. So just three versions of the license. Human readable deed here you've seen. Next one here, this is the lawyer readable code. If you're a lawyer, you're probably interested in this. If you're not, like me, you probably never look at that. And then, of course, the machine readable code is very important because if your object that you're sharing is digital, could be a song, could be a video, could be a course, could be a textbook, could be all sorts of things. If it's got the machine readable metadata on it, then in fact it can be found by search engines. So a good example is if you go to Flickr, if you go to YouTube, you'll actually see the license on it, and if you're at a search engine, you could find those openly licensed materials. In fact, you can search by open license. So this is a chart that just kind of shows you the exponential growth. You can see back in 2003, there were very, very few people using Creative Commons, and it simply exploded. And in fact, these numbers are already out of date. Now it's well over 500 million, and it's growing extremely fast, mainly because of several of the platform adoptions that Creative Commons has had lately with Blackboard and with YouTube and with Vimeo, and just all sorts of them. So we operated in multiple different areas. Certainly in culture, it's really where we started, was working with artists who wanted to share their creative works. Science is huge. If you can think about science for a minute, right? That's what we do in the academies. We build new knowledge, we share it. But from a scientific perspective especially, think about medicine, the critical nature of sharing information and data and research in close to real time so that others can, take your cancer trial that you're working on with your NIH grant and take it to the next level. It's absolutely critical. Governments are starting to talk about open policy, which we'll get to in a minute. And of course, open educational resources is absolutely key. So important thing about Creative Commons, even though we're headquartered in California, but we've got staff all over the United States and all over the world, the real power of Creative Commons comes in the CC affiliates that are around the world, and we've got 72 teams of dedicated people in all these different countries who are educators and lawyers, and these folks spend all their time, and in fact, in many cases at no pay, working on open licensing, working on advocacy of openness, helping other people understand not only Creative Commons, but why open is so important as the world progresses. Wikipedia, huge user. They use the CC BY SA license. Flickr, again, if you upload your images, you can not only tag your images with CC licenses, but you can search by others. White House uses CC BY and all of its stuff. Higher education's pretty much where I work, and in K-12, obviously, we all know about MIT OpenCourseWare, but there are hundreds of universities and colleges which have gone open. You'll find a lot of them at the OpenCourseWare Consortium. Foundations are now starting to require that if you take money from them, that you put a CC BY license on what you take. Hewlett's been doing that for years. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is starting to do that. Shuttleworth does that. Open Society Foundation and others. We talked about search and discovery. You can go into Google, for example, and do an advanced search by open license. CC Search is another tool that we maintain. Translation and accessibility. If something is openly licensed, you're actually able to translate it into a different language. If it's not accessible enough, you can take that resource and mark it up so it is accessible to, say, a screen reader if someone is maybe not able to see well and needs that kind of assistance. Customization and affordability are kind of where I live as far as my reason for wanting to talk about open educational resources, and I get so passionate about it in education, is on the customization front. professors and teachers in K-12 can actually take openly licensed resources and legally change them, modify them, mash them up, do different things to those resources, whereas it's illegal to do that with something that's copyrighted where you don't have permission. And affordability, of course, raise your hand if your students have complained about the cost of textbooks. All of them have, right? And to the extent that there are open textbooks and there's open courseware out there, it's absolutely critical. So let me pause for a minute and we'll go back to Steve.
So I hope you don't mind my doing this, but I'm hoping to break this up just a little and give us a chance to do a little bit of back and forth. So the opening of textbooks makes a lot of sense. And Utah obviously just made an announcement about this, and David Wiley talks a lot about it. My question would be, is an open textbook almost a red herring? Meaning, how relevant is the textbook? And is the aggregation of content actually going to stay in a form that we would call a textbook at all? Now, it seems like this is sort of the next natural step. You move from proprietary textbooks sort of to open textbooks. But I don't use a textbook at all in my own learning. I'm aggregating and curating content from the web. So do you think that the textbook itself actually is going to live on?
No, I'm with you 100%. I don't think it will live on. I think that we're going to move to finding resources in real time. I think resources will be on frameworks that work for faculty and for teachers. You just look at K-12 and look at what's happening in the U.S. around Common Core standards right now. A teacher that teaches a class that's on Common Core standards, what are you going to want? Well, you're going to want all sorts of choices of content, both open and commercial, that's aligned with Common Core, because you have to align with Common Core standards. In higher ed, same thing. I mean, look, there are some common frameworks for English 101 and Psych 101. Not to say that we should have one version of a course or a textbook for everybody, but I think people are going to want loosely jointed modules, just like they do today. It's what faculty do today already, right? They use, even with textbooks, they'll take chapters out of sequence. They'll take parts of chapters in their syllabus. They're already mixing and mashing. So yeah, I think that the reason that we talk about open textbooks today so much in OER is that's where K-12 is. They buy textbooks. And frankly, that's where higher ed is in many cases. A lot of courses have textbooks. And to the extent that they're required for full participation in the class, and they're very, very expensive, it's a target. And one of the sort of open policy strategies is to go after highest enrolled courses, because that's where the numbers are. And one of the reasons to go after textbooks is that's where a lot of the money is. The amount of money that students in higher ed spend on textbooks annually approaches $9 billion a year. And when student debt has now passed credit card debt, many of us, including me, would argue that's not okay. So as long as textbooks are around, let's go after them with open textbooks.
Yeah, it is a curiosity to me, and I think in part because there was some clarity for me when Apple made their announcement, which was it almost felt like continuing to call it a textbook actually allowed the major publishers and Apple to define their own relevancy still in the marketplace. And so that's sort of an intriguing point, which is I can't decide whether, the argument is really important that there's a lot of money there, or should we be saying, the textbook in and of itself needs to go away.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it'll be around as long as faculty are still choosing textbooks, which, by my estimation is probably 5 years. And what Apple's doing, I think mostly it's about selling, selling devices. They don't make any secret about that. If you look at the EULAs that they've got that people have to sign, it's pretty clear that they want to maintain the same kind of channels that they have with iTunes. On the other hand, Apple is, a very elegant platform, not an open platform, but a very elegant platform. I'm on using my Mac right now. And I think there's great opportunity around if we can get Apple to allow the authors to tag and license by, to tag their content by license and allow users to search by license. That'll be really great, and not just in the iTunes platform, but for the new iBooks platform as well. And that's certainly a conversation that we'll be having with Apple.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, great. And I just realized I can't see your hand when I'm on my other screen, so I'll go a few slides and then I'll pause and come back to the screen. So,
don't worry, I'll let you know.
Great.
And,
so we're on.
I think we saw your mother-in-law. Was that her in the background?
On the chart. That'll be good. All right. So back to this idea of open policy. Why zero in on policy? Well, real simple. That's where the money is, right? Most of the money in education, it comes out of the public sphere. So before we get into what this chart is, what do we mean by open policy? Well, open policy very simply is that when public funds are used, that what's created should be openly licensed, or publicly funded resources are openly licensed resources. Or as David Wiley likes to say, buy one, get one. Right? If the public buys something, they should get access to it. And while there are certainly many open licenses and a lot of people sort of hack together their own licenses, we should really be demanding that publicly funded educational resources should use an open license that allows the public to do what David calls the 4 Rs: revise, reuse, remix, and redistribute. So the license has to allow for that. And for the purposes of open policies that contribute to the commons, we're really talking about legislation, regulation, funder mandates, things like that, right? We want the people who are giving the money to say, if you take this money, you will share what you build. You don't have to give it away. I mean, you keep the copyright, so you keep ownership. And in fact, you can commercialize it if you want to, and if you want to give your copyright away to, say, a publisher and sell the thing that you produced, that's okay. But because the public paid for this thing, the public should get access to it as well. And the way that you do that is you throw a Creative Commons license on it, and hopefully a more liberal license like a CC BY or a CC BY SA license. And then the people who paid for it actually get access to it. All right, it's a very simple argument. Now, so what's this chart? Well, this chart simply shows the percentage of GDP that countries spend on education. And if you look at all the countries in the world, it's about 5%. That's a lot of money, right? Brazil, 5% of their GDPs, roughly $2.1 trillion. So let's go to the next slide that says global GDP. If you add everybody up, it's just under $60 trillion a year. We spend about $3 trillion a year on education. So that's a lot of money, right? You're talking about a lot of money. And if we can move to a simple open public policy, in fact, hundreds of billions of dollars every year of educational resources, scientific research, and literature could be available under an open license. It would be freely and legally available to the public that paid for it. And so to the extent that national, provincial, state governments play a role in setting policies, and they in fact set policy and legislation around the investments that are made in research and in education, they have a significant role to play in this. Let's go to the next slide with the bicycles. So that's why open policies are important. And people gripe about OER sustainability or open sustainability, and I say garbage. That's not an issue. If in fact you get the simple open policy idea right, you have no sustainability issues, because there is so much money in the public sphere that goes into education. And if we simply make a requirement that those things that are produced are open, in fact, you have way more money than you need to sustain all the OER efforts and all the open access efforts. And the trick here is that we shift so that open becomes the default and closed becomes the exception. And in fact, today it's opposite, right? Today the default is closed is the default and open is the exception. And we need to switch that. We're in the wrong frame today. And I'll give you a real-world example. So the state of Washington dropped a bill in the legislature that's being considered right now that says if you build something with state money, you will put a CC BY SA license on whatever you build. You keep the copyright, faculty, members at the universities and the community colleges, but you have to share with everybody else what you produce. And if you don't like those terms, don't take the state money, right? It's no different than taking a grant from a foundation or from the Department of Labor or the NIH grant for research. The default, however, today is closed, and many of the faculty from the universities showed up and said, no, we don't like this policy. And they didn't like it for a whole bunch of reasons, which we can get into later, but they were not willing to go that route. Now, ironically enough, the community college faculty, bless them, showed up and said, we think this is a fabulous idea, and we support it. So let me pause for a minute and go back to Steve.
So Larry Lessig was at the heart of Creative Commons, when it was built. I mean, I don't know that story well enough, but I'm sure that you do. Larry's current push is clearly on the role of money in our government, especially in Congress. Does Larry ever talk about the role of money in the politics around education? And clearly there's going to be pushback here in a really big way. So how do you hack at the roots of that? Is this that effort?
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, so several questions there. Yeah, yes, Larry's talking about money in politics right now and how it fundamentally corrupts an honest conversation about real issues, and he's got a new book about that very thing, and he's kind of interested in that. Yes, so he's talking about it. Yes, money does, not just money, and I wouldn't directly blame current flows of money. I more blame all of us for not being willing or able to think in new ways. And that was really my point back on that slide of the Capitol, where I said we have to help policymakers understand what's possible today. So if you're a legislator in the U.S. Congress today, all you know is what you know. You probably have no idea about Creative Commons. You don't know that you could openly license something and still allow somebody to keep the copyright. You probably don't know that. You probably know that there's something called the internet, but you probably don't know the affordances of digital things. You probably don't know that you can make 1 billion copies of something like a textbook for the marginal cost of 0 and share it with everybody in the United States, and you could probably drop the student debt load somewhere south of the $1 trillion that it has already passed. You probably aren't thinking that way. So, the reason I call this talk the obviousness of open policy is that I believe, and in fact my experience has been, when you sit down with policymakers and you sit down with the people who have control of the purse strings, of the money, and you talk them through these things, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle people are on, Democrat, Republican, or any other party, people say, gosh, this just kind of makes sense. Like, why would we pay the University of Washington to build English 101, and not just build it once, but build it the 15 times of the 15 different faculty that are teaching it, but then also pay, Columbia Basin College, which is on the call here, to build English 101 25 times because they have a lot more students taking English 101. Why would we do that, right? That just seems crazy. And you're telling me those people aren't sharing with each other, and in fact there's no requirement for them to share, and you're telling me that the same taxpayers in the state of Washington paid for both of those all of those 40 sections of English 101 to essentially recreate the wheel, and nobody's sharing. And in fact, if one faculty asked another faculty member to share, they could legally say, no, I'm not going to give you my stuff. Now, most people would say, that's nuts. And you sit down and have this conversation with policymakers, and they agree with you very quickly.
So I think what I really like about this talk, and hearing it now for the third time, but in its newest incarnation, is that in fact you're tapping into a really valuable narrative, and that's sort of the money narrative. And so rather than saying we should be Jeffersonian and we should be lighting everybody else's candle and the room grows brighter, or like Richard Stallman, that we all need to be Boy Scouts, and this is sort of the do a good turn daily by sharing. This becomes a message that should resonate with policymakers, and I think it's brilliant.
Well, thank you. I'm going to send him $20 for calling me brilliant. Maybe I'm not brilliant. The argument's brilliant. So let me go ahead and jump forward here. So again, it's simple, right? Here's the argument on the screen. You walk up to a legislator and you ask them these 3 questions. Do you care about efficient use of state or federal tax money? Yeah, right? Who's going to say no to that? Do you want to save students money? And do you want to increase access to education? Yes, 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 right? It's very, very simple. And Steve, could you go to the next slide where it says cooperate and share? And if those arguments don't work, you go to these, right? Most of the academy will say, yeah, when we cooperate and share, that's good, right? That's what we do in the academy. We share knowledge. Affordability, that tugs on some people's heartstrings. Students can't afford textbooks. Let's make that better. Self-interest. You go to a lot of faculty and they'll say, gosh, I want to be more famous, or I'm about ready to retire and I want my legacy to live on. Like, I've got an ego. Fine, share. You will be more known and popular if you share your stuff. And then you got a bunch of bleeding heart liberals like me who say this is a social justice issue. In fact, if the marginal cost of sharing knowledge is close to zero, then you've got I believe we have an ethical and moral responsibility to share. So next slide, this funny lady who's upside down. So what's possible with open policies? Remember, we said there's a whole bunch of money in the public sphere, and if we're going after highest enrolled courses. So what's possible? Well, there's a whole bunch of money out there in the public, right? If you look at the European Commission, they spend $640 billion a year on basic R&D research. So this is like NSF type funds or NIH funds. But $640 billion a year. I mean, think if all that was required to be openly licensed. How much faster would science progress? How much faster could we get a cure for cancer? How much faster would we get new drugs? I don't know, but a lot faster than we do if it's closed. The U.S. spends approximately $60 billion a year on NSF and NIH grants. So there in fact is something called the Federal Research Public Access Act that will likely be introduced again this year, which will basically say if you're a government agency in the U.S. and you spend more than $100 million a year on they call extramural research expenditures, these are like optional grants at the agencies, then all of the research and the journals that stem from that must be free. Let's go to the next slide that says textbook RFP. So sort of to Steve's point, here's the strategy. You go where the numbers are. So I always talk about higher ed and K-12, and in higher ed I say, let's go where the numbers are. Let's go to highest enrolled courses and highest enrolled textbooks. So highest enrolled courses, that's what the Open Course Library is about. I think Jerry jumped in there. Jerry, could you type in opencourselibrary.org just so everybody's got it? And that's where the Washington Community Colleges said, here's our highest enrolled curriculum. We're going to build it. We're going to put a CC BY license on it. Take it. Right? Think of the prep time that would be saved if professors around the world grabbed that and didn't use it exactly the way it is, but used it as a base. California is about to launch a bill that says $25 million of state money from California, issue RFPs, 50 highest enrolled textbooks, so they're going to spend $500,000 per textbook. Anybody can reply. The publishers can reply. Steve can get a group together and reply and build one of the highest enrolled textbooks. Everything copyright will be held with the state of California. They're going to put a CC BY license on it. It's going to be free for everybody. Right? That's good public policy. That's thinking, right? Because California has serious higher ed problems, and they need some relief for their students. In K-12 in the U.S., it's like fall off a log simple. You go after Common Core. You got 44 states, probably 47 by the time it's done, who are adopting Common Core standards. These are states that are going to need new courses, new textbooks for their students. They're going to spend a boatload of money doing it. Why would they not want to get together and share and, in fact, use some common resources? So let me do one more slide and then I'll pause. Well, two more slides and I'll pause. Here's another example. So when I worked at the Washington State Board for Community Technical Colleges, you can tell all the Washington references here, we looked at the highest enrolled course in the state. And at that time, it was English Composition 1, probably still is. At the time, the enrollments were 55,000. They're probably more now because of the economy. But look at the numbers, right? If you look at a $100 textbook, and in fact, it's not a $100 textbook. The average cost of the top 50 textbooks sold in U.S. college bookstores has passed $175. So plug that number into this instead, and you get over $8 million a year. But let's be conservative and call it $5 million a year. So what does this mean? This means that just in the Washington community colleges, for one course, for one textbook, just Washington community college students are spending more than $5 million a year. Right? Does that make any sense? And Steve, let's go to the next slide that has the big insane sign on it. No, it doesn't make any sense at all. Right? If we were smart, we would do what California is doing, and we would develop and create open textbooks and give them away to people because it costs very little to make them, it costs very little to maintain them, and then you give them away for free. And when I say it costs very little to make, I mean you might spend $1 million making the thing, but if you've got like the community colleges in Washington have, they got 500,000 students a year that go through the system. The amount of money per student is very, very small. Back to you, Steve.
Okay, so in the case of textbooks, it feels pretty clearly this is going to displace money that's been spent other places and have an impact on, say, the textbook industry. In the case of research, could a counter-argument be made that the full burden of the research costs isn't in fact in the government money, that there are other sort of outcomes that are positive that are provided for by the university or the organization retaining some ability to manage that in the future? And will they come back and say, in the moment you require that it be open, it actually is going to cost more?
That felt like a big softball coming right across the plate. I appreciate that. So, so there was and I can find the links a little bit later if we've got time at the end. But there was a couple studies actually done that looked at the cost, the total cost from idea to a journal article published in a peer-reviewed journal of a National Institutes of Health grant. So I get a grant, I'm a professor, I'm at X university, it's a big NIH grant, I do the research, I do the rigorous study, I write it up, it goes to the journal facilitates a peer review process. By the way, when I turned it over to the journal, I had to give my copyright over to the journal, so I no longer own it anymore. The journal then does the peer review process. All of the faculty who are contributing to the journal are doing it at no cost, it's part of their discipline. The journal then publishes the article usually a year or so after. They're fairly slow in their turnaround, and then my university, in fact, has to buy that journal subscription back, and then I have to pay it. And if my library is going through budget cuts, like all public libraries are right now, it's probably illegal for me to even use my own article in class, because my library cut the journal and I gave up my copyright. So that's the way journal publishing works traditionally, and I would argue that too is an insane model. But to your point about cost, by the time you get through that whole process, the cost of the journal article is about $102,000. That's how much the whole chain costs. The amount of money that the journal, the Elsevier journal, put into that process, I think the number is about $2,500. So of the $101,000, about $2,500 is put into the journal, and look who owns it, and look who's making all the money at the end, right? Journal owns the copyright, so they have the legal rights to it, and they're selling it for tremendous profit margins. In fact, the journals make somewhere between 40 and 70% profit on their sales every year. It depends on which journal you're looking at, but most people in the open access, and open access is part of this whole conversation, but basically says that journals and research should be open, say that's not okay. And in fact, because the journal does so little and gets everything at the end, gets all the money and gets all the copyright, that deal sucks. And here's the kicker. We could blame the policymakers for, once they understand this, for not having rational policy. All we can blame for this journal cycle that we're on is us, right? We are the faculty, we are the universities who do this to ourselves. And so, in fact, if maybe somebody could type in the directory of online journals, DOAJ, and put that link in, you'll see that more and more open access journals are coming online, and they're saying, no, not anymore. From now on, we have a new policy as faculty. We have a new policy as universities where we're going to publish in open access journals. We're going to do so under an open Creative Commons license, and we are going to make those available for free. And then the shift of the money is that the libraries no longer have to pay $12,000 a year in journal subscription fees, but now the college pays the open access journal maybe $1,000 to submit the article and be published. Because yeah, there's still a little bit of cost, but come on, the journal software is open source now, and so it costs almost nothing to set it up, nothing to host, maybe a little bit of facilitation and staffing costs, but I mean, look at Steve's operation here, right? Steve runs on a shoestring with very few staff, mainly him, and he uses software around the world, and he leverages the internet, and he is incredibly powerful and successful in his messaging. So this can be done if we're smart enough to leverage these tools.
So I recently took a train trip from Salt Lake City, Utah to San Francisco, and when you go over the Sierra Nevada mountain range, you go past a place where they used to make ice. It was so cold they were the ice makers. Okay, so clearly when refrigeration came around, that industry just died. So if the argument for those journals has been the argument of distribution, of the value of distribution, then they're not going to go away without kicking and screaming. So are you seeing any cases where it actually makes, where we're going to have difficulty, where the lobbying or the money is going to make the logic difficult?
Yeah, so what an intro to the next set of slides. I skipped over something we kind of already talked about. So let me shoot at a few slides here, and then I'll shut up and we'll come back to Steve. So this one I like, I love. It's, by the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but all these pictures. What I did is I went to Flickr and I went to the advanced search and I said only give me pictures that have open licenses on them. And so in fact I'm legally allowed to use these under the conditions of giving attribution. So if you look at all these slides, this one was by Suki, and it's titled Massive Change, and then you've got the link there, and you can see it's under a CC BY license. So Steve's actually absolutely right. The challenge here is that existing structures are difficult to change. And let's be frank about it. The people that have the power and the money want to keep the power and the money. They have no interest whatsoever of giving that up, and they will fight like hell to keep it. I mean, let's be honest about it. So, most educational content businesses, which is usually what we're talking about in education, these folks are built on models, of gatekeeping models, of locking up resources. And now they're locking up digital resources for the sole intent of making them rivalrous so that you have to pay for them, right? They're locking them up behind a paywall. And I don't blame them for doing that, right? That's what they have to do to sustain their own models. And so, Steve's absolutely right. What's happening is they're starting to fight. And they have money and they have lobbyists. So Steve, let's go to the next slide. It says battle over online course fees. This is a case in California. California law says that students be allowed to keep the educational resources they purchase when an instructional material fee is charged. So if you require a student buys a textbook for your course, the law says in California that the student gets to keep the textbook. Now, if they want to sell it in the used textbook market, that's fine. That's their choice. But they get to keep it. Well, the new model from the commercial textbook publishers is that they want to make the first sale to every student, right? They don't want a used textbook market. They don't make any money in the used textbook market. But if I give you something that's digital, can't you just give it to your friend? Well, of course you could, right? And that's one of the affordances of digital things. And so what do the textbook companies do? Well, they time bomb the materials, right? They put a time bomb on it so that 3 months after you turn the key and turn the thing on, poof, your access goes away. Well, this violated California law. And so the textbook companies went in, by the way, in closed doors, illegal, breaking the sunshine law, the laws of California. And they had these meetings, and voila, the outcome of the meeting was that it's okay to change the law so that the textbook companies can sell these time bomb materials. Well, this is a picture of Darrell Steinberg, who's the head of the Senate who stopped this thing, and he said, no, this is not okay, and in fact, we're going to challenge it. Some light was shed on it by the press, and they beat the publisher model back and kept the law. So Steve, go to the next slide if you would, and it says defeated, right? So that one got killed. Let's go to the next one. So the next one was, you probably all know the Department, and go ahead and read what's in bold here if you would. The Department of Labor put out $2 billion to community colleges to build the next generation of courseware. And they require that on those public funds, again, good public policy, said you must share what you build because, hey, this is federal taxpayer money, and you got to put a CC BY license on what you build. This was the response from many American Association of Publishers and others who said we don't like that. And this is absolutely nuts. I mean, read this thing. It says it doesn't say anything about open licensing or not. It just says you can't build anything if it already exists in the market, or, and this is my favorite part, if some commercial entity in the market is going to build it. So vaporware is fair game to stop you, Columbia Basin Community College, from developing anything. So let's make this concrete. The University of Utah wants to build the next developmental math program because they've got this really great school of education, and the math department have partnered, and they go for one of these Department of Labor grants. The answer would be, no, I'm sorry, you can't build it or take a grant to do so because the McGraw-Hill can sell it to you. Oh, wait a minute, or Pearson might think of developmental ed. Well, let's go to the next slide. That obviously was garbage, and so it too got defeated. Let's go to the next slide. SOPA, we all saw SOPA and PIPA in the Senate. And let's go to the next slide of the Wikipedia blackout. You saw what happened here, right? Again, the community, we all stood up and we said, no, we will have a free and an open internet. And in fact, having that is absolutely critical. So let's go to the next slide, the HR 3699, and then I'll pause after this. This is the new one. This one, by the way, is still live. And this is going right at the open access that we were just talking about, where journals and research should be freely and openly available to the taxpayers that paid for it. This, again, is AAP, American Association of Publishers, and Elsevier and others who are members, saying, no, sorry. From now on, the public may no longer have access to what it pays for, and this is the language that they use. And so if you translate this bill, put it in plain speak, it literally says, if public tax money is used to fund research, and that research becomes quote-unquote private research, once the publisher, quote, adds value to it by managing the peer review process and then distributing it to us. So the publishers, I kid you not, are arguing that the value that they are adding is in the peer review process, which they do not do, right? They facilitate. The peer reviewers are the faculty out there around the world, the experts in the field, who are working for free. These people aren't getting paid anything. So that's adding value from the publisher's standpoint. And then their distribution to us, so the thousands of dollars that they charge our libraries, and they put the thing in the mail and send it to us, give me a break. We have the most powerful distribution tool called the internet that the world has ever known. And if that's really their argument for adding value, and frankly, that's the kind of the core of what this bill sits on, I think they're in real trouble. So one more slide, Steve, to the T-shirt. That says see rules number 1. So, this is where, I get excited about open policy. And that is that we need to simply change the conversation. And we have to say, we are a unique market in education. We are both the producers of textbooks and of research and of courses. And we're simply, we're not going to play by those rules anymore because we know better. Because we know that when we use public funds, we should share what we build because the public should get what it paid for. We know how to use the internet as a distribution model. We know that you can make 1 billion copies of a digital file. The marginal cost is 0. We know it costs nothing to store, it costs nothing to distribute, and it costs nothing to make copies. We know these things. We know how to use Creative Commons licenses, and we're not going to put up with these business models anymore. So Steve, back to you.
So I'm getting a note from my staffers to ask some questions. They're all around me. Okay, so here's my dilemma, right? We spent a lot of time recently talking about Finland and talking about their policies, their education policies in Finland. And intriguingly, Finland has much more of a consensus culture, and their national narratives are much more around consensus than they are around competition. So our national narratives are much more around competing interests. Our legal system, our political system, our economic system, the larger narrative is not fairness, it is that people compete in order to get to a greater good. I worry a little about this particular approach as brilliant as I think it is, that it plays into this same narrative around sort of money-driving decision-making. And there's a part of me that wants to really sort of stand up and give you a standing ovation for this, and there's another part of me that says, I don't think we should even be playing in this arena. That in order to do this, you just disrupt from the outside. You just make it possible for people to aggregate content in ways that are going to just completely shift the game. Because I don't want to play into that existing narrative. I don't think it can be beaten. So how do you resolve that dilemma?
Yeah, so I resolve that dilemma by cheating and doing all the strategies and angles simultaneously. So I don't choose one route. The only reason that I'm even talking about open policy and actually, engaging in these conversations with governments is because only a few people are, and I haven't seen anybody that's sort of crystal clear on the main points, right? They futz around different parts of it. I wanted to come out and in a very clean way, lay on the table what proper public policy should be with public funds, right? And these are not my original ideas. All I'm doing is mushing together other people's ideas. So let me say what I mean by cheating and doing everything at once. So first, I think that there's when people get concerned about whether or not the government should be involved at all in these conversations, especially in a capitalistic economy where intellectual property is more and more important in the 21st century. I demand that whoever I'm talking to, that we are thoughtful about splitting the conversation into two parts. And it's really important because if you don't do that, you'll get wrapped around a pole very quick. So the first question, I think, is should the government do something? Right? So, because that's usually where political fights will go haywire on you. Is some people think that, the government should be involved doing a certain thing, and some people say they shouldn't. So, and I think that's a fine debate. It's not one that I'm particularly interested in, right? So, I think it's fair to say, should California get involved with funding the creation of textbooks? Remember, they're not building them. They're going to put out competitive RFPs, and may the best vendor win. So, in fact, it's a very competitive process. But it's a fair debate to say, should California get in the business of funding textbooks? I happen to think they should because there's so much pain for students, et cetera. But that's a fair debate. It's fair to say, should the government do anything? It's a second conversation to say, once the government has decided to fund something, and it's using public money to do it, should that thing be shared with the public that paid for it? That's what this conversation is about. So the NIH is in the business of funding basic research around science. NSF is in the business of funding scientific research. The Department of Energy is in the business of funding the next perpetual motion machine or whatever it might be. Right? They've already made those decisions. Congress gives them money to do certain things. All I'm saying is once that decision has been made, let the people get access to what they paid for. Right? The public should have access to what it paid for. And let me give you another example, just try to make this even more obvious. Think about your hometown and think about the new road that's going in on Main Street where you grew up. Right? And that road is being paid for by the gas taxes that you pay and your neighbors pay and the people in the next county over pay. And it's federal gas taxes and it's state gas taxes. And that's what's going to pay for the road. And so you paid for the road. So here's the question. Should you be allowed to drive on the road that you paid for? Most people would say, yeah. Right? I paid for the damn road. I'm the taxpayer. Let me drive on the road. How would you feel as a taxpayer if your taxes paid for the road, and then there was a big toll booth on the road, and the contractor who got the bid to lay down the concrete to build the road said, we got the bid to build this thing. By the way, we own it. We have the rights to this road, and we're going to charge you again. We're going to charge you a second time. You've already been charged once through your gas taxes. We're not going to charge you a second time to drive on this road, right? You'd lose it. You'd come absolutely unglued. It would be on the Fleecing of America on Brian Williams on NBC, and the thing would get shut down tomorrow. And yet that's exactly what we do with educational resources. That's exactly what's happening in my state and every other state with all the funding of education that's being produced, all the courses. It's exactly what's happening when textbooks are produced. It's exactly what's happening when research is produced, right? So that's part of the answer. The other answer is, and this is another angle, is, Steve, you are absolutely right. These systems will fight like crazy. They've got money. They've got lobbyists. It will be slow change. And so we simultaneously disrupt. We do things like, let me go back a couple slides here. We do things like this, right? We do peer-to-peer university where we say, scrap the existing system. People want to get together and learn, and they want to get badges when they do for a new form of accreditation. Western Gov comes up and says, forget seat time, right? We're going to do competency-based, and we'll give you credit based on your prior experience. Straighterline comes along and says, $100 a month, all the community college courses you can eat. University of the People comes along and says, wow, open educational resources? That's interesting. That's free stuff. I think we'll build a curriculum on that. We'll take the open course library, and we'll educate everybody in the world, and we'll get all those baby boomers who are retiring, who are willing to work for free because they were all hip to the Peace Corps, and we'll get them to volunteer. In fact, they've got over 1,000 of them. You've got OER University, based out of New Zealand in the Commonwealth of Learning, which is saying, yeah, people are going to learn all over the place. They're going to need a place like WGU or other partner institutions they have to come and get their accreditation. By the way, WGU's, I don't think one of their anchor institutions, but Empire State College in New York is. So there are these new models that are totally disruptive models that do not obey any of the existing rules or structures of higher ed, and they're simply saying, we're not going to play by those rules anymore. So let me, I just got a few more slides. Let me just wrap real quick, and then we can start talking some more. So back to the boring policy makers, right, that are going to be slow to change and slow to understand. I think it's still worth talking to them. And here's, well, A, because they've got all the money. But B, if you talk to them about these points and use these kinds of arguments, you will be shocked at how quickly they say, yes, how can I help? So if you bring them back to what I call first principles that they care about, and this may not be your philosophy, but this is what politicians care about: efficient use of public funds to increase student success and access. That's what they care about when they're making education investments. And this second point here is sort of the trick. If you can get them to understand and agree that existing business models were okay in their day, but hey, the world has changed and there's new possibilities, and you educate them about the affordances of digital things and all the other stuff we've talked about, then you can get them thinking in new ways. And so the end game is that we move forward with politicians with these discussions. So, and let me go back to my other slides here real quick, because I had a quote I wanted to give. So, by the way, these are the only pictures I took at the MLK Memorial, and you can see they're by Cable Green, but they're under a CC BY license, so you can take them and use them if you'd like to. So you remember that food machine that we started with at the beginning, and we said, yeah, we turned it on if the marginal cost of sharing was zero? Well, we don't have a food machine, and it's as lousy as a deal as that is. We wish we had one. We don't. But we do have a learning machine, and in fact, if we are willing, and let's go to the next slide, Steve, to the open slide. If we're willing to simply turn it on, right, if we as faculty are willing to share, that's all it takes. We put an open license, we put a Creative Commons license on our works, other people will take advantage of them. And moreover, because those of us in this room either already understood before we came, or we now have a better understanding of the tools that are possible with the internet and the strategies that we can use, I contend, and in fact, I put this responsibility on you, that we have a moral and an ethical responsibility to act. Good news is we're off to a good start. There are many open policies out there. We didn't have time to talk about a lot of them today, but it's starting to happen. So let me come back here. So let me just put out this offer. Creative Commons, and this is part of my job at Creative Commons, we stand with you on these issues and these topics. If you have an open policy opportunity in your state, in your country, and you want our help, we stand with you in this fight and in this change. And important closing thought for all of us: in the 21st century, the opposite of open is no longer closed. The opposite of open is broken. I thank you very much. That's my email address, and there's my Twitter. Now, if you want to find my blog, just go to Google and type in cable space OER, cable OER, and you'll find my blog. I tweet about this stuff all the time, and as I find new resources, I put them up there. Back to you, Steve.
So, Cable, we've gone over our normal hour, and as a courtesy to our guests, we normally finish quickly so you can go do other things. I have one more question, and I'm wondering if you have time for that, or how much time you want to give us, or should we cut it off now?
Nope, I got plenty of time. I've got probably another 15 minutes I could take.
Okay, I appreciate that. So this question is going to drive us a little deep, and I'm curious as to how you'll perceive it. I've been watching my own behavior, And you know, I gave a talk at the conference in Park City on sort of the cognitive and cultural barriers to openness. And I'm interested in my own personal interest and how it often trumps my willingness to share, right, or to do things that would fall into the category of open. And in particular, my use of Google Chrome over Firefox. I'm a huge fan of Mozilla. I've been in the open source world for a long time now, but at some level I justify to myself something out of ease of use or some personal benefit when there's a part of me that says I should be taking the higher road. Is there a degree to which we are combating not just political forces here, but some of our own kind of internal cognitive forces? And are there ways in which this is difficult for us because we may not be built to always share?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and there's actually an important conversation that's happening right now, not called OER, but called OEP, for Open Education Practices. And they are not obvious, right? So the idea of, hey, when I build something, I'll slap an open license on it. Yeah, it takes you an extra 10 seconds to do it. It's relatively simple, but to even think about doing it is a practice that you kind of have to get into. But before I go into the practices, let me just say this. I'm a case in point of the point I'm about to make. I believe that people are generally good, and that most educators generally want people to learn, and that most educators and people involved in research or education or funding of education generally believe that sharing knowledge is a good thing, and that sharing knowledge is really the way that fields and the academy in general moves forward. Okay, so I believe that. I also believe, as you correctly pointed out, that sharing those objects, those artifacts, is not a natural act, and that especially in this country, we are predisposed not to share. Big part of, I think, the problem is our education system, especially as we are training people through K-12 and in higher ed. We set up competitive situations. We say, don't share your answers with somebody else. Don't give somebody else the test questions. Don't share your paper. Don't you dare plagiarize. I'm not advocating for plagiarism, but we actually encourage people to have original thoughts and original ideas, and we really downplay remix as being a valid educational activity. That's starting to change, right? Most people who are education reformers, in fact, understand that remix and taking other people's works and then giving credit, but creating new things is absolutely critical. So my own personal story on this was when I was at the Ohio Learning Network, and this was 2004 maybe. My boss walks into I hope she's not on right now. Kate Carey's her name. She's a wonderful woman. But Kate was my boss, and Kate walks in and says, Cable, what's up with these blogs? Like, what are blogs, and are they any good for education? I'd never heard of a blog. I didn't know what it was. I was the director of technology. That was my job. So I said, I don't know. Let me give me a couple hours. I'll look into it, and I'll get back to you. So I hop on my computer. I look up blogs. I read a bunch of blogs. I walk back into my boss's office, and I said, blogs are stupid. Blogs are all about people's cats. They're about recipes. They're about why somebody didn't want to go to work today so they could go skiing. They have absolutely no redeeming educational value whatsoever. Then somebody asked me the same thing about Twitter and et cetera, and I had similar answers. Now this stuff's crap. Education takes place in the classroom, et cetera. Boy, was I wrong. And the main reason, and this is my point, that I was wrong is that I didn't have lived experience myself, and because I hadn't done it yet, I couldn't understand it. So what happened, so sort of the end of the story is when I started to blog, when I started to tweet, when I started to put open licenses on my works, I hadn't gotten any smarter, and I really hadn't gotten any more interesting, but boy, I started getting offers to do keynote speeches all over the place. And I got offers to be on boards of new universities. And I got offers to write book chapters. And I got new consulting gigs. I got all sorts of this great stuff started happening to me. And I went, oh, I get it. When I share, more people are going to be able to know about what I'm doing. They'll be able to access what I'm doing. I started to, my boss from then on, Kate, would start walking into my office with very complex educational technology problems, and she would say, could you please solve this? I didn't have the foggiest idea how to solve it, but I knew that if I shared my problem, other people would help me solve my problem. And I still do that today. When I have a big problem or I can't find some data or something, what do? I throw it out on Twitter. I put it on my blog. I put it out to the listservs that I'm on, and I say, I have a problem and I need help. Will somebody please help me? And I think that that's exactly the same thing that you're saying and you're doing when you put an open license on your textbook or on your course. You're saying, I'm a faculty member and I've done the best job I can on this course, and it's really good, but I know it can be better. But the only way it's going to get better is if I put an open license on it and I share it, because then others will find errors that I've made, others will make iterative improvements to it. But Steve, you're right, that step from I don't share and my value is what I hold tight and that I don't share with you, to the more I share, the more valuable I become and the more valuable my work becomes, that's a big step. And so my advice to people is always, share a little bit. Put an open license on your blog, share your images on Flickr, maybe put when you put videos up on YouTube, stop using the standard YouTube license and start using the CC BY license. These are all small steps people can take, and then maybe they'll share one of their courses under an open license. But you take these baby steps and pretty soon really good things start happening to people when they share, and it clicks like it clicked for me.
So if you look at our Constitution, there was a lot of thought around how do you create a way to protect freedom, knowing that human nature will sort of, or at least the belief that human nature would trend toward selfishness. In this sort of utopian vision of sharing, which I agree with, do we think that we've reached a place because of the technology where we can overcome those natural difficulties, or do we need to be thinking about larger policy structures to protect ourselves from ourselves, to protect the freedom from the potential desire to take advantage of it?
It's a good question, but let's go to the specifics of copyright in the Constitution, right? So the Constitution has one or two sentences on copyright. It basically says, we're going to give you a monopoly on your creative work for a short period of time. And if I may get my dates screwed up here, but I think it was 14 years, and then you had to go back and actually renew it for another 14 years. And so, but there were a couple things at play there. One is you actually had to go get a copyright. You had to file for the copyright. And then you had to file to renew the copyright. Now, it was only about a page to renew it. It wasn't a big deal. And it wasn't too difficult to do. But the result of those two things was that relatively few people applied for a copyright. Most things were just shared. And then the people that applied for the copyright in round one, I think it was only 30 to 40% of them actually reapplied to continue their copyright. Because remember, what a copyright is really a short-term monopoly on your creative work before it goes into the public domain. But eventually it goes into the public domain. So, what has happened to copyright? You look at the history of copyright, and the Congress, right, the people who make laws, have extended it and changed it. We have the Sonny Bono Act. So I think what we're up to now in the U.S. is death plus 70 years. And is that appropriate? Is that an appropriate amount of time to protect somebody's copyright to make the short-term financial gain that they're going to be able to make from their song or their video or their textbook before it goes into the public domain? Because if you think about it, a monopoly is really the public saying, we grant you, the individual, the rights to not share for a period of time before you have to share and it goes into the public domain. And again, back to your point, Steve, about lobbying and money, what's happened is lobbying and money has caused copyright to get longer and longer and longer. So that's really why Creative Commons, one of the main reasons why it was started, was to be disruptive to that, and yet to respect copyright and to work within the copyright system. And the cool thing about Creative Commons licenses, of course, is it's global. So if, back to your point, Steve, about having disruptive models of higher ed, like peer-to-peer university or university of the people, as individuals, and this is what's really cool, as individuals, individual creators who are building stuff, we have the choice to ignore and say, we do not agree to abide by those rules that the Congress has set for us about death plus 70. I'm going to put my stuff into the public domain today. So Creative Commons is a public domain tool where if you wanted to just put your stuff right into the public domain, totally give up your copyright, you can do that. A lot of people don't want to do that. They want to keep their copyright, which is fine. But Creative Commons licenses allow you to say, yeah, I'll share, but under these conditions. And so that's what's cool, right? I mean, you look at, like, say, the Arab Spring, right? People took communication tools. They took cell phones plus social networking, and boom, the government lost complete control over messaging. The messaging was controlled by people who wanted to, in that case, overthrow governments. And I'm not taking a political position. I'm not advocating for, a revolution. All I'm saying is that the power moved from the people who made the laws and had all the money and the power to the individual. Same thing with open licensing. McGraw-Hill and Pearson and Elsevier, they may have billions and billions of dollars, and they may give campaign contributions, and they may try to get laws passed, but we don't have to play by those rules. Steve, I don't know if you caught my chat a minute ago, but my request to Steve, I forgot to ask him before, is that this recording, since I participated at no cost and on my vacation, Steve, then I request that this have a CC BY license on it. And I hope, I don't know, but I hope Steve puts Creative Commons license on all his stuff. I don't know if he does or not, but I'll certainly push in that direction. Let me get off the mic.
The website that hosts all of the recordings does have a Creative Commons license on it, but I don't actually put any license at all on the recordings. They basically go into the public domain. So I want to leave this question hanging, because in fact the Egypt example is a really good one. After the participation by the individuals, after this sort of change in narrative, is this period of time that feels very fragile. And it's not clear to me that in fact that movement is going to move forward in all positive ways and isn't going to be co-opted. And that's sort of my question, which is, when you get past the early adopters, you get past the excitement, do you then have to really look closely at a policy level to protect those freedoms? Because in fact that Tahrir Square moment isn't the final end of the story. Hey, you've been really generous with your time. I'm going to clap for you here. I do have to tell you, I have a huge amount of appreciation for this message, and really appreciate what you do, the work that you've done, and the work that you're doing, and I want to thank you for coming on.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for coming. It was a real honor.
Most appreciated. Take care, everybody. We know we've kept you a little bit longer tonight. Cable, thanks to your family, your in-laws, everybody who allowed you to make this, spend this time with us. Really appreciate it. Have a great night or day, everybody. Take care. Bye now.